Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgia Catholic, with another Isaac Asimov short story. This one is fairly minor. It gets his name is on the cover, although it's kind of hard to see. It's kind of got scraped off of the label. But you have to go to the table of contents to see what it is. In fact, interestingly enough, this got published as a probability 0, left-right Isaac Asimov, page 156. And you may remember probability 0. The idea was to write a story that an amateur could have written, to just kind of find a way to break into writing science fiction. So it's kind of a revisiting of old days when he wrote such a story as Time Pussy and a couple other stories he wrote, one of which was First Wob, which didn't sell on that basis and didn't see print for quite a while, but it showed up a bit later, about, maybe a decade later or more. And there was a third one, I forget which one it was. But at any rate, although, as I'm looking at this, here we are, page 156 and 157. The whole story is just these two pages here. There's only one small illustration. We'll get to that in a moment, what that is. Interestingly enough, right before here is a page here with a familiar phrase, in times to come. Just like old Astounding Science Fiction days. What's going to be in upcoming issues of the magazine? In times to come is the column for that. It still has the same name, even though it's now analog instead of Astounding, science fiction. Who knows? That probably goes a bit clear back to Astounding Stories, for all I know. At any rate, this probability is called left to right. It's a fairly straightforward. You got a physicist who has a name of Robert L. Forward, and he has created this thing. It's like a ring with particles moving around it at a 0.95% the speed of light, and for some unknown reason, this is supposed to supposedly reverse the polarity of anything that passes through it. I don't get it, but okay, we'll just pretend that makes sense. The usual techno babble you see in a science, like describing all the different parts of a warp drive propulsion unit, all the components of a functioning warp drive propulsion, it's like it's gibberish, really, scientifically speaking. But it sounds to me actually a little bit like a plasma pinch machine, but which is to say, for those not familiar with that, an early experiment in attempting to control thermonuclear fusion. They did this back in the 1950s. A very simple, even simplistic design, which just fell flat on its face, and they had to move on to other, stellarators and tokamaks and so forth that get us closer, but who knows. At any rate, somehow passing through this ring of 95% of the speed of the light particles is supposed to reverse something, especially of a more organized structure, such as a human being. And the physicist, Robert Forward, decides to pass through it himself. The only little artwork associated is this little tiny drawing. This is supposed to be Robert L. Forward. He had to climb up a ladder, and has this sort of donut-shaped thing, and he's going to just pass through that and come out with something reversed. So, he talks about, who knows, maybe it'll be left or right. So suddenly all the molecules of your body will be the wrong kind for all the food that exists or anything else. If anyone ever read the original James Blish Star Trek novel Spock Must Die, after a weird transporter incident, we suddenly have two equal, but as it turns out, opposite Mr. Spocks. And the original is, of course, simply itself, but the other one has everything reversed because of the nature of the accident. And he ends up having to synthesize food for himself because all his atoms, all the protein molecules are the wrong-handedness, left hand, right hand. Anyway, so that would be one thing. But hey, if that happens to you, no problem. You just pass through it again. It's like flipping a switch. It's a toggle. You turn it off, you turn it back on, or vice versa. But he also considers that maybe this would be a way to produce antimatter. Now, he went through that machine and turned himself into antimatter the moment the positrons of his atoms met up with the electrons of the atoms of the air on the other side. You would have a massive explosion, say nothing of the protons and antiprotons, etc., and neutrons and antineutrons and every other particle that makes them up. You would have a massive matter-antimatter explosion. You really would not, unless you could do it all in the vacuum of space. You put yourself in a teeny tiny space capsule, pass the whole thing, everything gets turned into antimatter, but it's in the vacuum of space, and then it can pass through again and become regular matter, and then it would be alright. But he just simply steps in there. You see, he doesn't have a spacesuit or anything. He just climbs to the top of the ladder and hops through the thing and hopes for the best. I'm going to go ahead and give away the punchline on this because there's not much of a punchline. There is a further punchline that comes a little bit later. This part is a rarity, but I will get to this. The basic story here, as given here, so he does this thing, and nothing seems to have changed, except that he swears his name is Robert L. backward. Yeah. Okay. Well, that story is, however, whatever it's worth, collected into Isaac Asimov Gold. So, it's a tiny short story, and not terribly interesting as one put together. It's still called Left to Right, and let's see here. What does it say about that? Left to Right. 33. 33. Nope, it just gives the story itself. And as I went through it reading the original and that, no discernible difference. Now that could be all there was to it, but there's a follow-up. And since it is in here, that story is not to be counted as a rarity. What is a rarity, however, is the original came out in the January 1987 issue of Analog Science Fiction. Now, the neat part, the rare part, comes out in the June 1987 issue of Analog. So what happens here? This little squib that will explain. And again, probability 0. Left, right, and beyond, which now is Harrison Roth and Isaac Asimov, page 116. So once again, he is like taking on a collaborator. So this kind of comes in a special category because it is a collaboration. So here we have it again. No artwork associated unless you want to regard this page decorations as artwork. So let's read the squib that describes the story of how Harrison Roth and Isaac Asimov came to work together on writing this story. There's an editor's note. It says, in our January 1987 issue, we published a probability 0 piece by Isaac Asimov called Left to Right. About the time that appeared, and when hardly anybody had yet seen it, Isaac was the featured speaker at a Science Fiction with Isaac Asimov weekend at the Mohonk Mountain House near New Paltz, New York. Among other things, in his opening remarks to the program participants, he read Left to Right aloud, but without an ending. Teams of participants were then challenged to come up with their own endings to be submitted to Dr. Asimov in writing and also presented dramatically before the entire assemblage at the conclusion of the weekend in competition for prizes, including a chance at publication in analog. Mere words, of course, can only hint at the theatrical splendor of the shenanigans that ensued. The winning entry, printed below, was the only one with any resemblance to the original, but Dr. Asimov was the first to concede that this one, in certain respects, goes well beyond his. So you don't have to dig out your January issue. We've reprinted Isaac's beginning down to as far as, and he dropped through. So let's read this part. He wants to go through this thing. It's the moment in the drawing. Remember, he's climbing to the top of a ladder. Here's this donut thing right below where he's about ready to hop in. And there's a paragraph it leads up to. And without further ado, he climbed a small ladder, balanced himself over the hole, and walked through. Asimov then has him falling through, and I've explained that already. Now, everything after that in this presentation of the story is by his fleeting one-time, one-shot collaborator here, Harrison Roth. So, and when Harrison Roth knows that, Robert L. forward dropped through the hole. It was not a toroid, but it was a solid shape whose cross-section was an octagon. So now we have a Robert L. downward, and a Robert L. upward, and a Robert L. outward, and a Robert L. inward. It's octagonal. So you got 4 more. You got 8 sides. Okay. There's Rob L. Hubbard, who found some arguing with Isaac Asimov. Leave me alone. I just found in the science of donutetics. Little satire of L. Ron Hubbard's invention of Dianetics that John Campbell came to be obsessed with in the early to middle 1950s. Really launched that whole thing, which now exists as Scientology, to a major start. Really helped that get going. Thanks, Mr. Campbell. I mean, he gave us a lot of great science fiction authors, Asimov, of course, but you would have bringing a lot of great people to attention, including Heinlein, and even I think Bradbury had a brief appearance somewhere in the pages of Astounding, Vogt, and so many others. Great stuff. Great stuff. But we can also thank him, if you want to use the word thank, for introducing what would become today, Scientology. There's a lot to say about it, but I'm not going to say it here. I'd probably get sued if I did. So I'll just leave it here. Donutetics. Nice little satire. Okay. Then Robert L. backward. Oh, we had a Robert L. backward, just like we did in the other word. Who was growing younger and younger. And then there was a Robert L. transward. And he saw Isaac Asimov, not to be outdone, jumping through the odd-looking donut. There was a clap of thunder and a howl of pain. 2 people stared at the other and take my hands off me. Take your hands. Oh. Because he ended up with a Roberta Asimov. And then there's an epilogue. There's a joke about an 8-fold path to enlightenment. Okay, we would have to bring in a little Buddhist whatever, which has nothing to do with any actual 8-fold path. It really is like, instead of 10 commandments, it's sort of like 8 of them. Follow these things, that's your 8-fold path. Well, not bad for mere human ideas. And it ends with a pun. In typical Asimovian fashion. I won't give the pun. It's not a pun that relates to the usual kinds of things that Asimov puns might refer to. They might refer to common sayings or Gilbert and Sullivan things or what have you. This is a little closer to home, and I'll just leave it at that. So, and this, however, is a rarity. In the book only the original story was published, not what's his name? I just had it in front of me. Harrison Roth's addition to it. So that's kind of an interesting addition there. It makes what could otherwise have been an unremarkable probability zero take on some interest because it is a collaboration, or becomes, I should say, a collaboration of Isaac Asimov and Harrison Roth. Thanks for listening.